I'm Dolores Wendell, 73 years old, and the morning I woke up in that unfamiliar room, I stared at the ceiling for a long time, hoping I'd open my eyes again and be back home. The plaster was too smooth, the curtains too stiff, and the smell too clean, too empty. For a second, I thought maybe it was a hotel until I saw the two suitcases against the wall. The same ones Ethan and Paige packed without asking what I'd want to bring. They'd told me it was a tour, just a quick visit to see the place. But now they were flying to Europe, and I was here alone with a stranger knocking on my door, asking if I needed help unpacking before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt forgotten by the very people you raised. I was born and raised in Linwood, Arkansas, a town most folks pass through without stopping. My parents owned a corner store and believed in two things: keeping your word and keeping your family close. Married Harold Wendell when I was 22. He'd just gotten promoted at the post office, and he wore his shirts ironed so crisp you could have sliced bread on the collar. We bought our house on Birch Street when Ethan was 5 and Marianne was 3. A white clapboard house with blue shutters and an apple tree in the back. Harold built the swing set himself, even to the gravel path, with a shovel, and never once complained about his knees. He passed 5 years ago, heart attack right in the kitchen, while I was pouring him coffee. I still keep his mug by the sink after he died. The house felt quieter, but not empty. The walls still echoed with birthdays and burnt toast, and Ethan practicing the trumpet in middle school. I had my routines: church on Sunday, book club on Tuesdays, grocery run on Fridays. I managed just fine. But then, little things started slipping. I left the kettle on, once forgot my bank card code. Another time, nothing serious, nothing unusual for someone in her 70s, Ethan said. Wasn't coping, that phrase. "You're not coping" became the start of every conversation. He and Paige started showing up more unannounced. They'd bring meals in plastic containers, rearrange my medications, lecture me on fall risks and forgetfulness. I said no when Ethan suggested an in-home aide. I cleaned more, took a computer class at the library. Anything to prove I was still capable, still in charge. Paige smiled too much when she told me they'd found a place. It wasn't a nursing home. She said it was a resort for elegant seniors. Ethan said the first month was already paid for, a gift they called it. I told them I'd just come to look. The woman at the front desk greeted me like I'd already signed papers. They showed me the grounds, the rooms, the little gym, the dining hall. Then they opened the door to what they said would be my room. It had a private bath, a narrow bed, a window that looked out over the parking lot. Ethan said they couldn't leave me alone while they were traveling, that it wasn't safe anymore, and besides, they'd already listed the house for rent. He said it like it was a kindness, like it was his decision to make. I didn't cry after they left. I unpacked the suitcase and looked at what they thought mattered. My wedding photo with Harold, a few family pictures, my Bible, but none of my books, none of the little knickknacks that made the house mine. None of it felt like me. They called it a gift. They said it was best for everyone, but I knew what that really meant. And the next morning at 7 a.m., sharp, when the nurse knocked on my door and called me Mrs. Wendell, like we weren't even on a first-name basis, I knew something had shifted in a way I couldn't quite undo. But what Ethan didn't count on was that I wasn't ready to give up without a fight. I spent the first week at Pine Heights barely speaking. I ate in my room, brushed my hair in silence, and stared out the window like the trees might start talking. The staff knocked gently each morning, always cheerful, always calling me Mrs. Wendell, as if saying my name with a smile might make it feel more like home. It didn't. They had a schedule for everything: breakfast at 8, medication checks, senior yoga, bingo, lunch, movie night. A whole day carved up and handed to you like a tray in a cafeteria. On the 8th morning, I stepped out into the common lounge for the first time. A large room with soft beige carpet and a fireplace that hadn't been lit in months. A couple of women were knitting near the window, their needles clicking softly. Someone was half watching the news on TV. I sat near the corner, close enough to listen, but not close enough to talk. "New girl," someone said from the next chair over. I turned and met the steady gaze of a woman about my age, with cropped gray hair and a pair of striking blue eyes. She wore a cardigan with birds stitched along the hem. "Dolores Wendell," I said. "Vanity Ballard." She reached out her handshake, dry and firm. "Been here 3 weeks. Still figuring out how not to hate it." "I'm not planning to get used to it," I said. Vanity hummed and leaned back. "Dolores, that's sadness in Spanish, isn't it?" "I've never thought about it. I was a college librarian, history department. Spent 35 years correcting footnotes." "I like names. They tell you what people try to hide." She pointed at the wall behind the fireplace. "See that shelf over there? That's our so-called library. If you like romance novels with shirtless pirates, you're in luck. Otherwise—" I smiled almost in spite of myself. Vanity was sharp and unapologetic. She didn't soften her words or try to make anyone feel better. And maybe that's exactly what I needed. She introduced me to Alvin Price that afternoon in the dining hall. The only man in the building, she said, who could hold a conversation without bringing up a bad knee or a colonoscopy. Alvin stood as we approached, which no one does anymore. He was tall, with a neat beard and a button-down shirt tucked in like he'd dressed for dinner on purpose. "Just Alvin," he said when I called him Mr. Price. "And just Dolores, I hope." He told me he'd been an accountant, spent most of his career in tax planning for small businesses. No children. Widowed 10 years ago. Said arthritis made keeping up with the house too much, so he sold it and came here by choice. "You don't regret it?" I asked. "Sometimes," he said. "But I don't miss the gutters or the stairs." From then on, the three of us started sitting together for meals. Vanity filled me in on the unwritten rules of Pine Heights, who to avoid, who ran the book club like a dictatorship, which nurse was generous with the Tylenol. Alvin explained how their billing system worked and helped me understand the extra charges they quietly tacked on for little things. Extra laundry, a second round of medication, even printing from the computer lab. I started to pay attention. Not because I planned to stay, but because I needed to understand where exactly Ethan and Paige had left me. One afternoon at lunch, I asked Alvin, "How much does a place like this cost?" He paused. "Base rate is around $3,000 a month. With medical extras, 5 or 6. Depends." I sat back in my chair. Vanity leaned in. "My niece covers mine, with my money. Pension, Social Security. She handles the accounts. Says it's easier that way." "My son said he was renting out my house to pay for this," I said slowly. "What neighborhood?" Alvin asked. "Birch Street, corner lot. White fence?" He let out a low whistle. "That's a prime block. If it's in good shape, that house could fetch $1 million easy. Maybe more." I blinked. "Harold and I bought that house in '83 for $80,000. We paid it off in 20. $1 million felt like monopoly money." The next day, I asked Vanity to help me use the computer in the activity room. She was quicker than I expected, showed me how to navigate the county property records site. My house was listed for sale, not for rent, and not just listed, it had a pending offer. Asking price, $100,000. Liar Vanity muttered, leaning over my shoulder. My chest tightened. I opened my bank's website. I tried logging in. The password didn't work. I tried again. Still locked out. "He changed it," I said aloud. "He's got power of attorney, right?" Vanity asked. I nodded. "Then yeah, he's got access." We called the bank from my room. They confirmed it. My accounts were now under the management of Ethan Wendell, acting under legal authority. I couldn't even ask for my own balance. After I hung up, I sat in silence. Dolores, Alvin said from across the table, "This might be financial abuse. Elder exploitation. I've seen it before. What can I even do?" "You need a lawyer," Vanity said flatly. One who handles this kind of thing. I don't have money for a lawyer. You don't need money, Alvin replied. You need Gabe. That evening, Alvin introduced me to a young man in blue scrubs, about 25, kind face messy hair. Gabe Trumbull. He worked the evening shift and went to law school in the mornings. We sat in the staff lounge while he listened. I told him everything. The power of attorney. The surprise stay at Pine Heights. The house listed behind my back. My accounts taken over without a word. This is serious, he said quietly. But you have options. A power of attorney isn't permanent. If you're still legally competent, and you are, it can be revoked. He offered to connect me with someone named Audra Minsky, an attorney who handled elder law cases and sometimes worked pro bono. He said she was sharp, experienced, and took injustice personally. You think she'll even meet with me? I think Gabe said she'll make time. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat up in bed staring at the picture of Harold on the nightstand. I thought about all the birthdays we celebrated in that house, all the Thanksgiving dinners. The time Ethan broke the back window with a baseball. The time he cried when his fish died and Harold built a little cross to mark the grave. I opened my phone. I typed a message. Short. Just a few words. I've rewritten the inheritance too. I hit send. Then I set the phone down and whispered, let's see what you do now. The morning after I sent that message, I was halfway through my oatmeal when my phone buzzed. Gabe's name popped up on the screen. Mrs. Wendell, he said, his voice quick and steady. Audra Minsky agreed to meet. This afternoon, 2:00 in the visitor's room. I've already cleared it with the director. I set my spoon down and nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Thank you, Gabe. Bring anything you think she might need to see, letters, photos, even bills you've signed. She's going to want samples of your signature. I hung up and went to my closet. I took out my purse, opened the little zippered pouch inside, and pulled out what I had: a copy of the electric bill from last month, an old note I'd written to Mary Ann, a thank you card I'd signed for the church secretary. Not much, but enough. When 2:00 came, I was sitting at the table in the visitor's room with my hair brushed and my best blouse buttoned to the collar. The woman who walked in was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, trim, and professional dark hair pinned up neat. She carried a leather folder and introduced herself with a firm handshake. Mrs. Wendell, she said. I've been briefed, but I'd like to hear it all directly from you. I told her everything. The way Ethan and Paige had started showing up more often. The way they'd insisted I couldn't manage on my own. The power of attorney. The day at Pine Heights. The house. The accounts. The locked-out banking login. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just laid it all out like setting a table. Audra listened without interrupting. Every now and then she wrote something down. When I was done, she opened her folder and pulled out several forms. We'll start here, she said. This revokes the previous power of attorney. This one assigns me temporary legal representation. Read them carefully, there's no rush. She explained every section, what each signature meant, what protections were triggered, and how long they would last. I read every line before I signed. She slid the documents into her folder and looked at me. Next, I'll file for an emergency injunction with the court to stop the sale of the house. We'll also send notice to your bank to freeze Ethan's access. I'll need a short statement from you, and we'll also request a cognitive evaluation just to preempt any claims that you're unfit to make decisions. I nodded. I understand. She stood and smiled faintly. You've already done more than most. After she left, I walked down to the common lounge. Vanity and Alvin were sitting near the window playing cards. Vanity looked up first. Well, she's good, I said, pulling a chair up beside them. Good, Alvin said. You'll need someone who doesn't blink. That night, Ethan called. His voice was strained. Mom, what does that message mean I didn't answer right away? You rewrote the inheritance? Oh, I said lightly. That, yes, that. What's going on? You tell me. How's Europe don't play games? Who did you leave it to? I've been thinking about making some changes. You know, tidying things up. There was silence on the line. Then, what about the house? You mean the one you told me was being rented but is actually listed for sale? Another pause. We were just exploring options. You can't just change everything without telling us. Like you did. His voice rose. We had power of attorney. It means you should have protected my interests, not yours. He tried again. We'll be back in 2 days. We're moving the flights up. All right, I said. You can speak to me then. I hung up. The phone buzzed again a few minutes later, but I didn't answer. The next morning, I got a message from Audra. The court had accepted the injunction request. The bank had temporarily suspended Ethan's access to my accounts. A hearing was set for the following week. Over the next 2 days, I spoke with her several more times. She'd found evidence that Ethan had moved $35,000 from my account into his own, supposedly for my care, though the numbers didn't add up. Pine Heights didn't charge that much, and it certainly didn't include a European vacation. She also had the house documents reviewed by a handwriting expert. Your signature on the sale documents is likely forged, she told me. I've seen enough of your writing now to be confident. Is that a crime? It can be. Forgery is a felony, but the judge will consider the context. I don't want him to go to prison, I said quietly. Not yet. Not if it can be avoided. I understand, she said. We'll focus on restoring your rights and your property first. Ethan and Paige arrived the next day. They texted before showing up. I agreed to meet them in the same visitor's room where I'd met Audra. They walked in looking tired. Paige barely glanced around before sitting. Ethan looked at me and shook his head. Mom, what are you doing? Protecting myself, I said. He leaned forward. You sent me a message saying you changed the will. Then we find out the bank blocked our access. What are you trying to prove? That I know what you did? He looked down. You can't live alone anymore. That's what this is about. You sold my house. We didn't sell it. Paige cut in. We listed it. You forged my signature. That's selling. Ethan's jaw clenched. You're taking this too far. There's a court hearing next week, I said. My lawyer has the paperwork. You're serious, I am. They stayed for another few minutes, then left. Neither of them asked how I was doing. Later that evening, Audra called to confirm that the listing had been pulled from the real estate site. The bank had fully restored my access. She would be coming in the morning to help with my discharge from Pine Heights. That night, I packed the 2 suitcases they brought me in silence. In the morning, I stood by the front desk while Audra signed the paperwork. The administrator looked at me with surprise, but didn't say much. Vanity and Alvin met me at the doors. Vanity handed me a piece of paper with her phone number. You better call, she said. I will. I stepped outside and felt the sun on my face. I turned to look back at the building one last time before following Audra to her car. My house was waiting, but I knew nothing inside would feel quite the same again. Audra parked at the curb in front of my house. I stepped out slowly, suitcase wheels rattling across the sidewalk, and paused before climbing the front steps. The for sale sign was gone. In its place, someone had set out my old private property placard. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The scent of lemon oil and dust greeted me like an old friend. My living room was just as I'd left it, my quilt folded neatly on the couch, Harold's photograph on the mantel. The third stair still creaked when I walked up to unpack. Audra sat with me at the kitchen table while I made coffee. Same table where I used to pack school lunches, wrap Christmas gifts, help Ethan with his algebra. The chairs were the same, but the weight in the air was different now. "We have a strong case," she said as I poured 2 mugs. "But we'll need to stay ahead of your son. If he's thinking of pushing back, I want you prepared." "He'll push," I said. That afternoon, Ethan called again. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat on the back steps and listened to the wind move through the apple tree. 2 hours later, his car pulled up in front of the house. Paige was with him. They stood outside for a minute, looking up at the windows before walking to the front door. I opened it before they knocked. "Come in," I said. We sat in the living room. I stayed in my chair near the window. Ethan and Paige sat on the couch across from me. Neither of them spoke at first. "Mom," Ethan began, "I want to talk. No lawyers? No accusations? Just us." I nodded once. "I admit, I went too far," he said. "The sale of the house. The money. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I should have asked. I should have included you." Paige sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't speak. "Why didn't you?" I asked. "I don't know. You were slipping. You were alone. It felt like it was time to step in." "But you didn't step in," I said. "You took over." He looked down at the rug. "Where is this going?" Paige asked, her voice tight. "Are you going to press charges?" "I'm thinking about it," I said plainly. "You forged my signature. You emptied my account. That's not a misunderstanding." Ethan looked at me. "What do you want, Mom? What are you asking for?" "I want everything returned," I said. "All the money you moved. I want an admission in writing that you tried to sell this house without my consent. And I want you to pay the legal fees and the costs for Pine Heights." "That's a lot," he said quietly. "It's less than prison," I said. Paige glanced at him. "We'll talk," she said. "We'll get back to you." They left not long after that. By evening, I'd gotten a call from Marianne. She was in Portland and had just spoken to Ethan. "Mom," she said, "what's going on?" He told me something about the police, a lawyer. He sounded panicked. I told her everything. The silence on the other end lasted for nearly a minute. "He sold the house." "Tried to. He took the money." "Yes, and he put you in a care facility while they went to Europe." I heard her take a breath. "I'll be there tomorrow." Marianne arrived the next afternoon. She was still in her work slacks coat folded over her arm. She stepped into the house like she was entering a crime scene. We sat at the kitchen table. I told her what had happened slowly without sparing the details. She asked questions. She listened. Her hands stayed still the whole time. "Are you okay?" she asked when I finished. "I'm home." She leaned back and looked at the ceiling. I always knew Paige was trouble. I didn't think Ethan would go this far. "I don't want to talk about them anymore," I said. "They've done enough talking." Marianne stayed with me for 3 days. She helped sort through papers, made calls to the bank, sat with Audra for a follow-up meeting. We talked more that week than we had in years. "I don't want you alone," she said as she packed up. "You could come to Portland." "This is my home," I said. "I fought for it. I'm not leaving it behind." She nodded. "You need anything," she said before driving off, "you call me." A few days after Marianne left, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Liam and Cassidy were standing there, awkward and quiet. Cassidy held a plate covered with plastic wrap. "Hi, Grandma," Liam said. "We brought cookies." I stepped aside and let them in. They sat on the edge of the couch. Liam looked around like he hadn't seen the place in years. "Dad said you came home early," Cassidy said. "Did he tell you why?" Liam shook his head. "He just said there'd been..." Tension. I went to the kitchen, poured 2 glasses of lemonade, and brought them back. It wasn't tension, I said. He made decisions without me, took things that weren't his. They didn't say much after that, but they listened. When they got up to leave, I walked them to the door. "This house is still yours too," I said as they stepped outside. "Whenever you want to visit." Liam turned back. "Thanks, Grandma." That night, I called Audra. "I'm ready to rewrite the will I told her." "Let's do it." She came the next morning. We sat at the kitchen table again. I watched her take out her folder, her pen, her legal pad. "How do you want to divide things?" she asked. "I want most of it to go to a nonprofit that supports seniors in financial distress. I want 30% split between Marianne Liam Cassidy and Ella. No access for Ethan Nunn. And what about Vanity and Alvin 5% shared? They were there when I had no one. The rest goes toward end-of-life care, my funeral." Harold's grave. Audra made notes as I spoke. She didn't ask questions, she didn't need to. She just listened and wrote. "I'll bring the final papers by next week," she said. "We'll do a videotaped signing. Clean? Legal? Clear." "I'm ready," I said. I stood on the porch after she left and watched the afternoon light stretch across the grass. I'd always thought closure would feel like a door closing, but it didn't. It felt like something being built, quietly, brick by brick. And somewhere in that quiet, I heard Harold's voice again. Not his words exactly, just the calm way he used to speak when he knew I'd made the right call. The next week passed quietly. Audra brought over the finalized will, and I signed it with her and Gabe present. She recorded the video on her phone, time-stamped and sealed. She left a copy with me, one with Gabe and one with her own records. Everything above board. No loose ends. That Friday, I went to the farmer's market down by the old post office. It had been years since I'd gone, but I recognized a few faces: Mrs. Langley from church, the Gleason boy, who now ran his own produce stall. I bought honey and tomatoes, picked up a jar of homemade jam, and sat for a while on the bench near the fountain with a paper bag resting on my lap. The sun was warm on my arms. I watched people come and go. Young families, teenagers with phones, couples my age walking in step. I went home and arranged the tomatoes in a bowl by the sink. The next day, Cassidy stopped by again, this time with her little sister Ella in tow. I made sandwiches and sweet tea and let them talk. They asked about old toys they remembered from the attic, about pictures on the fridge, about the quilt on the couch. When they left, Ella hugged me without being asked. 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I recognized Paige's handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No apology, just one line: "We'd like to talk about a compromise." I didn't answer. The morning of the court hearing arrived cloudy and cool. Audra picked me up and walked with me through the courthouse doors. We passed the security check, rode the elevator to the 3rd floor, and took our seats outside courtroom C. Ethan and Paige arrived 10 minutes later. They didn't speak to me. Paige sat stiffly with her arms crossed. Ethan looked around, restless. His lawyer arrived just before the bailiff called us in. The room wasn't crowded. Just the judge, 2 clerks, a stenographer, and us. Audra presented the case calmly. She handed over the forged real estate documents, the financial records, the power of attorney filing, the video testimony of my signature being revoked. The judge flipped through the folders slowly. Ethan's lawyer argued that the family had acted in good faith, that they believed I was unfit to manage my affairs, that they had sought care for my best interests. The judge didn't raise his voice. He asked 3 questions. One about the timeline, one about the account withdrawals, and one about the listed sale price of my home. Then he leaned back, adjusted his glasses, and made it clear the power of attorney had been abused. My signature had been forged. My financial independence had been violated. His ruling suspended all legal authority from Ethan and Paige, pending full investigation. All assets were to be returned. He did not press criminal charges yet, but he authorized a forensic review of the transactions. Outside the courtroom, Ethan caught up with me in the hallway. "Mom, he said I never meant—" "You did," I said, "and you still are." He opened his mouth again, but Audra stepped between us. "This isn't the place," she said. Paige didn't speak. She looked straight ahead, jaw set, and walked toward the elevator without turning back. That night, I slept through without waking. First time in months. The next morning, I opened the blinds and let the sun fill the living room. I pulled out Harold's old chess set and wiped each piece down. I played one side against the other. Queen's Gambit. He always started with that. I left it on the table for later. That weekend I joined a neighbor for coffee. We sat out back in her garden, talked about tomatoes and roof gutters and how the new mailman wore sandals even in the cold. On Monday, Audra called. "I received the final review from the bank," she said. "You're clear. All funds returned. The house title is restored. The DA won't pursue charges unless you file." I stood at the kitchen counter, phone pressed to my ear. "Let's hold off for now," I said. "If they step back, I will too. And if they don't, then we'll finish what we started." The mail that day brought something unexpected. A padded envelope addressed to me, no sender listed. Inside was a small velvet pouch. I opened it and tipped the contents into my palm, the gold locket I'd given Cassidy on her 12th birthday. The clasp had been repaired. A note inside read, "Grandma D, thank you for the lemonade and the stories." I fixed it. "Love, Cassidy." I placed the locket on the windowsill where the morning light could reach it. Later that afternoon, I walked out to the sidewalk and stood under the apple tree. The air smelled of grass and clover. 2 young boys zipped by on bikes, their laughter carrying behind them. Marianne called that evening. "I spoke with Cassidy," she said. "She told me about the chessboard and the cookies and you." "She's a good girl," I said. "She is. And you're doing okay. I'm getting there." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm proud of you," she said. I didn't answer right away. "Me too," I finally said. 3 weeks after the ruling, the rhythm of my days had started to return. I went to the senior center on Tuesdays for knitting and Thursdays for bingo, just like I used to. My name was back on the utility bills, my checks came straight to me, and the bank manager even called personally to let me know my accounts had been restored. It was as if I'd been given my name back. One afternoon, I was weeding the side bed along the fence when Gabe pulled up in his truck. He brought over a stack of documents to review, final copies for the trust, the medical directive, and the house deed, all updated to reflect the new terms. We sat at my kitchen table, and he explained each form in that patient way he had. Cassidy had helped him organize everything. After he left, I poured myself a glass of iced tea and stood by the window. The apple tree had dropped a few early fruits. I made a mental note to collect them later for sauce. That evening, Marianne called again. She said she'd been thinking of visiting, maybe bringing Cassidy and Ella for the weekend. I told her I'd make pancakes. We ended the call with a promise to set a date. The next morning, I found a large white envelope sticking out of my mailbox. No stamp, hand-delivered. I opened it right there on the porch. Inside was a typed letter. No greeting, no signature. Just a few lines. "You've embarrassed this family long enough. Cassidy is not yours to influence. We won't let you poison her against us." Underneath was a photocopy of a flyer. The front page from Cassidy's middle school newsletter. A photo of Cassidy holding a trophy, her arm around me. The caption read, "Student of the Month with her grandmother Dolores Wendell." I stood there, the letter in one hand, the photo in the other. My fingers didn't shake, but I folded the papers carefully and took them inside. I slid them into a drawer under the telephone. That weekend, Cassidy came over again. We baked cookies, watched a movie, and she fell asleep on the couch. I didn't ask her about the letter. She was still just a girl. I didn't want her burdened with someone else's bitterness, but something had shifted. A few days later, Audra called. She said she'd been contacted by the county's Elder Affairs office. Someone anonymously had filed a complaint suggesting that I was being unduly influenced by outside parties, that I might be susceptible to manipulative legal action. They're trying to flip the narrative, she said. Make it seem like you're being used. They're desperate, I said. Yes, she replied. But we'll handle it. She advised me to start keeping records, save voicemails, screenshot texts, document everything. I bought a spiral notebook the next morning and kept it by the phone. Every interaction, every strange call, every note in the mailbox, I logged it. That same week, I got a call from a private real estate office I'd never heard of. They said they'd received a request to show the house and asked when I'd be out. I told them the house wasn't for sale. They apologized, said it must have been a mix-up. Gabe followed up and traced the inquiry to a listing that had appeared briefly online. Someone had used an outdated deed to post the house on a for sale by owner site. The post was removed within 24 hours, but the intent was clear. I'll escalate this to the DA, Gabe said. Even if they don't press charges yet, it goes on the record. That night, I double-checked the locks on the front and back doors. On Sunday morning, I went to church. The same small congregation I'd attended for decades. A few people had heard rumors, nothing concrete, but I could feel it in the way some heads turned. After the service, Pastor Coleman stopped me at the door. You doing okay, Dolores? He asked. I'm managing. He nodded. If you need anything, even just someone to sit with for coffee, I'll let you know. When I got home, there was a voicemail from Paige. Her voice was clipped. She said they'd spoken to a new attorney, that they had rights too, that they were pursuing their own legal remedies. I saved the message, logged the time and date. Then I made tea and sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open in front of me. Marianne called again 2 days later. I heard they've been poking around, she said. They're getting bolder, I replied. Do you want me to say something to Ethan? No. Let them keep talking. You sure? Yes. Let them speak freely while I listen closely. The next morning, I got a certified letter from a different law office. It accused me of coercing Cassidy and Marianne against Ethan and Paige. It claimed I was using family leverage to alienate minors from their rightful guardianship support. I handed the letter to Audra. We're going to respond once, she said. A single firm reply. Then we let them dig their own hole. The following Sunday, I hosted lunch for Marianne and the girls. We made chicken salad sandwiches and played dominoes in the sunroom. Cassidy asked if she could bring over some of her art supplies next time, said she wanted to sketch the apple tree. I told her she was welcome any time. Before they left, Marianne pulled me aside. I'm sorry, Mom. I should have stepped in sooner. You're here now. She nodded. Her eyes looked tired but clearer than before. That night, I walked through each room of my house slowly. I paused by the hall closet, the place where Harold used to keep the ladder and the spare bulbs. I stood by the bookshelf and traced the spines of old hardcovers. I stopped in the doorway of Ethan's old room, now empty except for a single twin bed and a worn rug. I closed the door quietly. Things weren't over. I knew that, but something had changed. They weren't in control anymore. They were reacting now, not planning. And the more they tried to twist the truth, the more visible their desperation became. The storm hadn't passed yet, but I wasn't standing in it alone anymore. About 2 weeks after that last certified letter, the investigator from the county called me directly. Her name was Denise Wilcox, a soft-spoken woman with a steady voice and a tone that didn't waver even when she asked hard questions. She said she'd be conducting a formal in-home visit the following Wednesday, part of the review, stemming from the anonymous elder abuse complaint. I thanked her for letting me know and wrote it in the notebook, Wednesday, 10:00 a.m. Denise Wilcox, Adult Protective Services. Gabe and Audra both advised me to be calm, cooperative, and honest. She's not your enemy, Audra said. She's here to look for signs of manipulation. Let her see the truth. That Wednesday, I made a fresh pot of coffee and set 2 cups on the kitchen table before she arrived. She was prompt, polite, and professional. She looked through the pantry, peeked into the bathroom cabinets, and took quiet notes on everything from the condition of the floors to the framed photographs lining the hallway. When we sat down again, she asked, "Are you aware that the complaint suggested you were being isolated from your adult children and pressured into legal decisions against your will?" I met her eyes. I'm aware someone wants it to seem that way, but I'm not isolated. I see my granddaughter every week. I have visitors. I go to church, to the senior center, and to town when I please. No one's controlling me. She wrote something down and nodded. Has anyone threatened you or implied you'd be cut off from family if you didn't change your will or deed? Quite the opposite, I said. The threats came after the changes were made, not before. When she left, she shook my hand and said she'd be in touch. 3 days later, I got a letter from the county stating that the case had been closed with no findings. I folded it into the same folder that now held all the other attempts. Lawyer letters, printouts, voicemails transcribed and printed. A week after that, Cassidy's school held a small art showcase. Marianne invited me and I brought a bouquet of pink carnations. Cassidy had drawn a charcoal sketch of the apple tree behind my house branches, reaching wide, one side fuller than the other. She called it the place that grows. I stood quietly while she explained the drawing to her teacher. I didn't interrupt, didn't wave her over. But when she saw me, her smile reached all the way to her ears. She ran over and hugged me so tight my glasses shifted. "Do you like it?" she whispered. "I love it," I said. Later that evening, after they dropped me off, I found another envelope in my mailbox. This time, it wasn't unsigned. It was from Paige. A single sheet typed. "You think you've won, but family doesn't forget betrayal, and neither do we. You're not the victim here, Dolores. You're the problem." I didn't respond. 2 days later, I was on the phone with Audra when she told me about a filing that had just gone public. Ethan and Paige were suing for financial restitution. They claimed I had appropriated family assets without the consent of the collective heirs. They were seeking repayment for repairs done on the house groceries over the years and something called implied rental fees for the time they lived with me. Audra said, "They're throwing everything they have at you now. It won't hold, but it's going to make noise." The next week was full of noise. News spread through the neighborhood. People asked me if I was really being sued by my own children. Someone left a church bulletin in my mailbox with a scripture circled in red pen, "Honor thy father and thy mother." I wasn't sure if it was meant as comfort or condemnation. But 2 days later, something shifted. I was at the post office when Mrs. Enders, a woman I barely knew outside of Sunday greetings, reached out and touched my arm. "Dolores," she said, "if you ever need anything, rides, errands, a warm meal, you let me know." It was a small gesture, but it cracked something open. A quiet kind of support began to show up in little ways. Cards slipped under my door, a bag of apples left on the porch, an invitation from my neighbor Ruth to join her garden club. Even Pastor Coleman called and asked if I'd be open to a prayer gathering at my house the following week. By the time the court date for the civil suit came around, Audra had assembled a case that was stronger than I'd imagined. Photos, receipts, witness statements from neighbors and former church members, even Cassidy's drawing, had been submitted as character reference, her own quiet testament to the truth of what my home had been. In court, Ethan looked stiff in a suit that didn't quite fit. Paige sat beside him, her lips pressed tight. They both spoke flatly about how much they'd sacrificed, how I'd turned on them after years of dependence. When Audra stood, she spoke slowly, deliberately. She laid out the timeline, the money trail, the patterns of coercion, the failed attempts to sell the house. She didn't embellish. She didn't need to. At the end, the judge looked over the pages and said simply, "There is no evidence of wrongdoing here, only of a woman reclaiming her independence from those who misused her trust." The case was dismissed in full. Outside the courtroom, Marianne hugged me tight and long. "I'm proud of you," she said. I didn't cry. Not there. Not then. But that evening, I sat on the porch and watched the sun set behind the apple tree. I thought about everything they'd tried, every document, every whisper, every scheme, and how none of it had stuck. They'd thrown everything at me, and I was still standing. Not because I'd fought back with noise or rage, but because I had stayed still and stayed true. That Sunday after service, Pastor Coleman joined me on the porch. He brought warm rolls wrapped in a dish towel and sat down like he wasn't in a hurry to be anywhere else. We talked about small things, Cassidy's drawing the first blossoms on the cherry trees, the church roof finally getting patched. When the silence stretched long, he just nodded and said, "You did right, Dolores. Sometimes doing right takes everything." I looked out toward the fence line, where the pear tree still leaned just a little from last winter's storm. It had survived even with the damage. I guess I had too. The months after the hearing were quiet in ways I hadn't expected. No more letters. No more calls from lawyers. Paige and Ethan disappeared from my world without so much as a goodbye. And oddly, it didn't ache the way I thought it might. Some endings don't come with slamming doors. They just stop echoing. Marianne came by often, and Cassidy liked to help me in the kitchen now. She'd roll out biscuit dough or count the spoons in the silver drawer, just like she used to do when she was small. One day, she found the old notebook I'd used to track everything during those hard months. She flipped through it slowly, then looked up and said, "You don't write in it anymore." "No," I told her. "I don't need to." Audra still checked in, though less often now. Her last visit, she brought me a small fern in a clay pot and said, "You were brave, Dolores, even when it felt like standing still." I'd never thought of stillness as brave before, but I suppose sometimes not letting someone push you over is its own kind of strength. I didn't get my children back, but I found something steadier. I found what was mine, my home, my name, my peace. And in that peace, there was room again for laughter, with neighbors for long walks, without checking over my shoulder for planting tulip bulbs, without wondering if someone would dig them up in spite. I don't know if Paige or Ethan will ever come around, but I no longer sit by the window, waiting for it. Sometimes, love doesn't return the way we hope. Sometimes, the love we give becomes a lesson instead. And the lesson I carry is this: your voice matters even when it shakes. Your worth doesn't shrink when others can't see it. And dignity, that quiet-rooted dignity, is not something anyone can take, not without your permission. So, if you're listening now and you've ever been made to feel small in your own home, hold fast. You deserve to stand where you are without apology. And if this story reminded you of someone you love or someone you lost, share it. Let them know they're not alone. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this one, I'd be honored if you'd stay a while, maybe even subscribe. Thank you for listening. Truly.